Exactly. Each dollar that you spend on that deal is earning a 6.1% return. That's exactly right. And that's totally separate of appreciation. That's totally separate of tax benefits. That's literally just the dollar for dollar weight. Yeah, exactly. It's a dividend. You nailed it. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Remote Investor. I'm Michael Albaum, and today I'm joined by my co-host,
Pierre Carrillo.
And Pierre and I are going to be tackling a hot topic issue today, and that is, when does it make sense to pay all cash for a deal? So let's get into it.
I like how you tried to really pronounce my name properly there. Pierre.
Pierre. We're getting into a topic today that I think is on a lot of people's minds, given that we're in such a high interest rate environment. So I will let you kind of steer the ship here and help keep us on the straight and narrow path for today, because I know we'd like to get off it quite often. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Let's just start with I know it's an easy terminology, but let's just define our terms real quick. Can you tell me the difference between these two strategies?
Totally. So like all cash, kind of like the name implies, is buying a property and paying in cash the sale price. So if the property is for sale for $100,000, you fork out in cash $100,000 plus your closing costs. So whatever that is. Versus using leverage is another term for debt, for a loan, for a mortgage. These all kind of mean the same thing. And it's basically using someone else's money, not your own, to pay for the vast majority, oftentimes, of a property where you are bringing to the table a down payment and then someone else is funding or financing the remainder of the deal. And in the traditional world, banks, lenders are going to be financing real estate transactions for investors or for owners. And typically they'll go 80% of the purchase price on the investment side, and sometimes 90 to even 100% in the owner occupant space. So if you, Pierre, are going to go move into a house, a lender is likely going to give you your loan percentage than someone like me if I was buying the property, exact same property, but for the purposes of investing.
That makes sense. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of each of these strategies and when it makes sense to use one versus the other.
Yeah, totally. So this is something that I've actually done. I've used both strategies, and I think both have their time and place in someone's portfolio based on kind of what they're doing and what the given market cycle and conditions are. So one of the pros, and it might be obvious to paying all cash, is that you don't have a mortgage payment dragging down your cash flow. And so when we're thinking about investing in real estate and thinking about cash flows, we have inputs and we have outputs. So our input tends to be the purchasing of the property, and then the output's going to be cash. And what's going to affect the cash flow, all else things being equal, so we have to keep in mind that we have expenses, operating expenses on the property, which are like our property taxes, our insurance, property management if we have one, any kind of repairs and maintenance. All of that are going to be uniform or the same, independent of whether we have a mortgage on the property. And so, again, we kind of want to remove that to the side for the sake of this discussion when thinking about when it makes sense, because they're going to be the same regardless. So what changes, of course, is the mortgage payment. So we are collecting rent, we are paying out all of the expenses, the operational expenses that we just talked about, and anything that's left over is our cash flow. Now, if we don't have a mortgage to pay, that's going to be everything that's left over as cash flow. If we do have a mortgage to pay, we got to collect the rent, we got to subtract out all of our expenses, and then we also need to subtract out our mortgage payment. Then if there's anything left over, we'll have cash flow. That'll be our cash flow. So without a mortgage to pay, it's just one less expense to worry about. And so it just makes owning and operating that property less expensive. Now, we paid for that right on the front end in the form of our all cash purchase. So for someone that is trying to maximize their cash flow, in other words, maximize the dollars that a particular property is generating for them, an all cash purchase makes a ton of sense. Now, something to think about. If you came to me and said, Michael, I have $100,000 to invest in real estate, how do I maximize my cash flow in any number of scenarios, not just an all cash purchase or not just a leverage purchase? Well, we could look at that and say, okay, well, maybe it makes sense to take that 100K, split it up amongst two properties and have two separate loans. We would look at the cumulative cash flow that portfolio throws off, against buying a single property all cash for that same $100,000, and we would see what made more sense. Now, the other thing to think about is just how does debt make you feel as an individual, as an investor? Because some people are very debt averse and risk averse. And so they see debt as risky and so want to avoid it at all costs. So there's the financial piece where we can come to the right answer. There's actually math will tell us what the right answer is. But then there's also the emotional piece that says, hey, you've still got to sleep at night. So make sure that the way you're investing is aligned with your risk tolerance and accomplishes what you're trying to do. So the biggest benefit, I think, is just not having a mortgage payment.
Can you talk to me about how you would calculate the returns on either of these? What numbers are we looking at? How do we go about making that assessment, whether or not one makes sense versus the other?
Totally. I was hoping we were going to go here because I'm the engineer, I'm the math nerd.
Do you have some numbers to walk through with us?
I do have some numbers to walk through with everybody. So we're going to take two examples here. One is going to be an all-cash purchase, and the other is going to be a leveraged purchase or a property we use debt on. And again, they're going to be the same exact numbers in terms of the expenses, the purchase prices, and the rents. The only thing that's going to differ is the mortgage. So we'll use a very run-of-the-mill property that we can purchase for $250,000. And again, one is all cash, so we're putting $250,000 into the deal. The other is a leveraged purchase at 20% down, meaning we put $50,000 into the deal. I used a very run-of-the-mill expense ratio, which is simply a measure of what percentage of all of the income that we've generated goes out the door to paying our operational expenses. Now, it's important to remember the operational expenses is not a mortgage. This is going to be your taxes, insurance, repair, maintenance, property management. These types of expenses are the operational expenses. A mortgage is totally separate entirely.
Oh, a mortgage is bundled up in those operational expenses, right?
Say that again?
The mortgage is bundled up within all of those operational expenses, correct?
No.
Okay.
Totally separate.
Okay.
Totally separate. So we've got the operational expenses, which is the costs associated with owning and operating rental real estate.
I'm with you.
The fact that we've got a mortgage now on top of that is a investor decision,
sure,
not a function of the property itself. So we have $250,000 purchase price, and let's walk through the all cash purchase first. So we put $250,000 into the deal, and I picked a number here. I said that property rents for $2,000, right? Whether that's reasonable or not in your particular market is irrelevant because we're using ballpark figures that do exist in a real estate market because I've seen them exist. So whether or not it's going to be as accurate for you, again, it's not the point here. We just want to make sure that we're arming you with the tools and understanding to go run the numbers for yourselves to figure out, okay, should I purchase my deal all cash or should I use leverage? Okay, so again, we're using 36% as our expense ratio, $2,000 as our rent, $250,000 as our purchase price. So after it's all said and done, our cash flow on a monthly basis should be $1,290 or just over $15,000 annually. And the way that we calculate what our cash on cash return is we are calculating annual cash flow out divided by total cash in. And so in this example, our total cash flow out on an annual basis is just over $15,000. Our total cash in is $250,000. So when we divide those two numbers, we see that we're earning a cash on cash return of 6.1%. Okay? So let's just hold that number in our minds for just a second.
That's how hard each dollar is working to get you a return.
Exactly. Each dollar that you spend on that deal is earning a 6.1% return. That's exactly right. And that's totally separate of appreciation. That's totally separate of tax benefits. That's literally just the dollar for dollar weight. Yeah, exactly. It's a dividend. You nailed it. So now let's shift gears here and talk about the mortgage property. So again, remember, same purchase price, $250,000, same rental amount, $2,000, same operational expenses at 36% of the expense ratio at 36%. But now we're borrowing $200,000 because that's the remainder of the purchase price. And we're going to use, in this example, a 30-year fixed mortgage because that's what I think a lot of investors are using. And I just called it 6%. based on when you're listening to this or watching this, 6% might be right on the money for where interest rates are for an investor property. They might be way low or they might be way higher than this. But again, we're just using a number here to demonstrate what the exercise in how to calculate these numbers. So if we assume a 6% interest rate, that means we've got a mortgage payment of about $1,200. Couple that with our expenses, and what we see is that our cash flow at the end of the day, we bring in the rent, we pay the operational expenses, we pay the mortgage, we're left with about $90 a month in cash flow, or just north of $1,000 a year. So again, we're going to go through that cash on cash calculation by dividing our annual cash flow that the property throws off by the original dollars invested. Now these numbers are going to be different. We're taking just north of $1,000 and dividing it by our initial investment, which was 50 grand. Now that number, Pierre, is that going to be higher or lower, you think, than 6%?
It's going to be higher.
Other way, it's going to be lower.
Lower.
Yep. So we're at 2.1% cash on cash return, which tells us that every dollar we've invested in this deal is only earning us a 2.1% return. Now, depending on when you're listening to this, a 2.1% return might be really ecstatic. You might be really excited about that. For me, I can put my money in the bank today's rate at 5% and have total access to it. So a 2.1% isn't very exciting. The all cash purchase, however, was at 6.1%. That's interesting to me. So that's how we calculate the difference between cash on cash return from an all cash purchase versus a leveraged purchase. Now, I want to do something with everybody really quick here. And what I want to do is I'm going to change one number. And the one number I'm going to change is our rent amount. So I'm going to kick this up from $2,000 to $2,300. And I picked this number kind of at random. Again, it's less than the 1% rule. But I'm curious, Pierre, do you think our all cash purchase is still stronger? Or do you think it's now flipped to the leverage purchase?
Sorry, you raised the rent from what to what again?
I raised the rent $300 a month. That's it. I made no other changes. Everything else remains the same.
Well, my intuition on the last one was wrong, but I think now with an increase of income like that, your dollars will be working harder for you. I think that number will go up. Over 6, I'm not sure though.
Okay. So let's see. With an all cash purchase, our cash on cash return jumped up to 7.4%.
Okay.
And with a mortgage, it jumped up to 8%.
Okay.
So what we found here is this inflection point, not on the nose. The inflection point would really be where those two numbers are equal. But we found that our initial scenario, it made sense from a pure mathematical perspective to make that purchase all cash because those dollars are going to be earning a stronger return. Now, if you're listening to this, you're like, yeah, Michael, I don't have that kind of cash. Of course, it's a no-brainer. Using a leverage purchase is the only way to go. The all cash purchase is not an option for you. So of course, but if you're someone that's in a position to have that decision to be made, to be able to make that choice, this is where I think it gets really interesting. You make the all cash purchase in scenario 1 because that makes more financial sense. But all we did was change the income by just north of 10%, which is not an incredible amount of percentage increase. That could happen over a couple years. And now it makes more sense to purchase this property with leverage. And I think one of the beautiful things about all cash purchases is you can make an all cash purchase today and turn around in a month from now and refinance it. Exactly. And go put debt on it or go put leverage on it, such so that you are getting the benefit or the financial benefit of owning the property with leverage.
So any one of these numbers in the calculations can sway the decision.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other big one that's going to make a huge impact is the interest rate. If we dropped our interest rate, let's do that. Let's play that game. So let's put our income back to $2,300, and let's just change our mortgage payment to be 5% instead of 6% on the interest rate. So right now, we're back at that 2.1. If we drop this interest rate to 5%, our cash on cash return jumps up to 4.9%. So a 1% change in the interest rate more than doubled our cash on cash return potential. So all of this to illustrate there is no one right answer. You've got to run the numbers on every particular deal that you're doing and then really look to engineer, okay, what makes the most sense? And the other thing too, I'll say, Pierre, that I love, because again, I'm a math nerd, I love about doing this sort of exercise is if we've decided, okay, a mortgage makes sense or a mortgage is my only option, it's not just 20% down and I'm done. If you put an extra 5% down, that also changes the numbers. And so in this example, because we saw that our cash on cash return was actually higher with an all cash purchase, the higher the down payment we put, the more dollars we put down, the stronger our return gets. There also tends to be this inverse relationship with interest rates when it comes to down payments. So the higher the down payment amount, the lower the interest rate tends to be. And if we just step back and think about it for a minute, I think that will probably make sense for most of us because there's less inherent risk in the bank. The bank is lending you less money, or in other words, you as the owner have more skin in the game. And so they can afford to give you a better interest rate because you're likely going to be a better borrower. So there's all of these various numbers to play around with. So if you're out there getting a mortgage, I encourage everybody to ask their lender, hey, what if I put 20% down? What about 25? What about 30? Ask your lender where there are interest rate breaks based on larger down payments. Sometimes they're at 5% and sometimes they can be really significant. So it's definitely worth asking the question. And then you, of course, get to decide at the end of the day, how much money do you want to put into this deal and what kind of return are you targeting? And do those things align? Can you get the numbers to work?
It sounds like you're using a calculator over there. What tool are you using?
I am, yeah. So I built a calculator for MyFi Academy, which is the education program that I put together and have out there. It's myfiacademy.com. It's a pretty slick calculator, if I do say so myself. I'm obviously biased, but I designed it to be, yeah. So I designed it. It's all the stuff that I've built over the years that have helped me do the deals that I've done to date. And so I'm constantly refining it and updating it and changing it and making it useful for folks. And if you're not an Excel nerd like me, it's okay. You'll still find it useful. And we have a basic version of it as well, if that's something that you're more comfortable with. But it just breaks out all the expenses and it allows you to play with different inputs based on your mortgage interest rate, based on your mortgage duration, based on your down payment. All of the various levers you have to pull are in this calculator. So come check it out. I think it'll help most people come to a conclusion at the very least.
I had to lob you up a softball, but yeah, I wanted you to tell us about the calculator because I've used that too. And it allows you just to analyze tons of properties. It's just a template. You go in, drop in your data. You can even make a master sheet and have it pull from different cells and you can just collect properties and have it pull from there. So
exactly,
really cool tool.
Exactly. Look, at the end of the day, it's all about information, right? And knowledge is power. And so having access to the information and understanding how to use the information that's going into any of these calculators, whether it's mine or somebody else's, you just want to understand what the inputs are and what the outputs are telling you. Because there's a great saying, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't understand what's going into these calculators or into these equations, what comes out is going to be meaningless to you. So I think it's important that everyone really gains an understanding of, okay, how do these things work? How do I change the inputs and how does that change the outputs? And then what do those results mean for me as an individual for my particular deal? One of the other things I want to mention and just share with everybody with regard to all cash purchases is if you own a property, let's flip the roles here. You own a property and somebody comes to you with an all cash offer and a financed offer. Which one would you rather have?
I feel like, the obvious uneducated inclination would be just to take all cash and run.
Exactly. So the reason behind it, your gut was right. The reason behind it, there could be a number of reasons, but first and foremost, and I think tends to be the biggest ones for sellers, is if you are offering all cash on a property, there is likely not going to be an appraisal contingency part of that offer. And what that means is basically if you write an offer or make an offer on a property that has an appraisal contingency, which a lender is going to make you have, a lender is going to go appraise the property, compare it against other properties in the area, and determine what the fair market value of that property is. Now, let's put numbers to this. If you go make an offer on a property that's listed for $100,000 and you have an appraisal contingency and you're using a loan. The lender is going to send their appraiser out there and say, okay, based on all these other comparables in the area, I think this property is worth $80,000. Well, the lender is only going to give you X percent of that appraised value. So let's say they're going to give you 80% of the appraised value. Well, the lender's only going to give you 80% of 80 grand. And you've got to come up with the rest if you still want to buy this property for $100,000. Versus an all cash offer comes in with no appraisal contingency. The seller doesn't have to worry about the property appraising for $80,000 or for less than the sale price. They just get to do the deal with the buyer. The buyer pays them the cash. Everybody walks away. So from a selling perspective, any contingency that's associated with an offer is a risk for the seller. And so the less contingencies associated with an offer, the less risky it is for that seller. And so all else being equal, an all cash offer is going to beat out a financed offer a lot of the time. Now, there could be other things at play here, right? The seller might, or one buyer might be a family and the other might be an investor, and the seller might say, no, I want to sell to a family. But again, all else things being equal, an all cash offer is superior to a financed offer. And so if you have the ability to transact with all cash, you are giving yourself better odds at getting your offer accepted. And then, like we said, at the end of the day, 30 days down the road, 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, whatever your lenders are going to require, you can turn around, refinance, and pull your money out of that deal, or percentage of your money out of that deal, of course. Now, there's risk associated with that too, because if the market has turned, the lender is going to require you get an appraisal to refinance your money out. And so if the market has soured in that time and the property has lost value, you're going to have to leave more of your money in that deal than if you had bought it financed to begin with on day one. But the real estate market is fairly slow to react. This is one of the reasons I like it as an asset so much. And so the risk of that happening is I would say fairly minor. I think the last one I'll leave you with is like, think about what the alternative options for any dollars you're going to be investing are. And so in our example, we had an all cash deal that was earning 6% or 6.1%, a finance deal earning 2.1%. And so if you're going to put your dollars in this real estate investment, those are the returns you can expect. And that's before any type of tax benefit or appreciation or the loan pay down. Those numbers are important to be aware of. As compared to, hey, if I go throw my money in the stock market or in a CD or a savings account, what do my dollars have the potential to earn there? And so we want to, again, always go into these situations with eyes wide open, armed with as much information as possible. And so we have the ability to invest in real estate, but we also have the ability to invest in other vehicles. And so we just want to compare and contrast, what can I expect from one versus the other?
Right.
Now, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about a dividend in terms of cash flow. So that's just the one component that we see from stocks. The other is the appreciation, of course, the increase in value of the stocks. So if we're going to compare head to head, real estate versus stocks or real estate versus any other type of investment, we do need the whole picture. And by whole picture, I mean the tax benefits, the loan pay down, the appreciation, and the cash flow. Versus if we're comparing real estate against real estate, cash versus non-cash, that math becomes a little bit easier since it's just cash flow out divided by cash in.
So in your comparison, when you looked at the cash versus leverage examples, are you calculating the tax benefits that you would be able to claim on your mortgage? Is that included in that consideration there?
Man, why you got to blow up my spot like that? I'm so glad you asked. No, it is not. And the reason it's not is because it's going to be slightly different for everybody. But I'm so glad that you asked, because I do think it's important to mention all of the interest on a investment property mortgage is going to be a tax deduction. So what ends up happening for most people, for a lot of people that use a mortgage, is that property is actually going to, on paper, post a net loss or a paper loss, because all of the deductions you're going to get from owning the property comprised of all of the dollars you're spending, in addition to the depreciation you're going to be able to claim on that property, puts that into a net negative. But in reality, you've actually put dollars in your pocket, real hard dollars that you can use and spend, into your pocket. So the interest deduction is going to affect each person based on their particular tax bracket and where they live on a slightly different basis. And so it's tough to quantify.
Right.
But
it's
as
a
an
benefit
individual,
that you're going to see kind of in over the duration of time, not something that you can calculate up front in pro forma.
Well, you could calculate it upfront in pro forma, but it's going to be unique and specific to you as an individual. So
Okay.
it's tough to give someone a pro forma or a calculator that says, this is your tax
Sure.
benefit. Essentially, it's going to be whatever your tax rate is in that particular state, both between federal and state. If you have state income tax, is how you need to determine that. And you could ask a real estate CPA, like, hey, I'm thinking about buying this property. This is what my pro forma says in terms of my cash flow. How does this impact my taxes? They should be able to tell you that up front. And then you can really get an apples to apples comparison of at least those two things, right? We're still leaving out loan pay down and depreciation, how that investment compares and what the potential performance looks like.
And this could be like a really dumb question, but like, if you can find properties that specifically work better for all cash purchases, and you can find some properties that specifically work better for leveraged purchases, and you have the opportunity or the ability to do both, all things being equal, would you prefer to buy all cash or all using leverage?
I love this question, man. It's really it's a good one. So yes, is
Yes,
my answer.
both.
So yeah, it really depends on what the goal of what your personal goal of why you're investing in real estate to begin with, coupled with what is the goal of this particular property, coupled with what does your time horizon look like. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. I purchased a property way back when. It was a multifamily property and it was really beat up, and I was doing a ton of value add work at the time. That was the season of my investing cycle. And so I was buying the most beat up, junkiest properties I could. So I bought it all cash because I got a way better deal on it. I was able to get a lower purchase price on the transaction because I went all cash, because it's a stronger offer.
Yeah.
I then refinanced my cash out. I think I was able to get 75% of my cash out of that deal, in order to then spend it on the rehab associated with that property that I knew it was going to require, to then turn around and refinance again once the renovation had been completed. Now, I didn't have the cash to buy it all cash and then pay for the rehab and then refinance. And so people listening to this are like, oh, Michael, you incurred 2 refinance costs. And while yes, that's true, it wasn't an option for me to purchase it cash and then do the rehab. And conversely, I got a better deal. I saved more money on the purchase by going all cash, because I could have financed it on the purchase, but it would have been more expensive. And so at the end of the day, my twice refinancing was still less expensive than financing it up front on day one. So it's, again, having the ability to go all cash, having the ability to finance are just tools in your tool belt, and you got to figure out what makes the most sense. If someone came to me and said, Michael, my goal is to increase my net worth as much as possible, I'm not worried about cash flow, that screams leverage purchase, because we want to spend as little money on every deal as possible, but control as much real estate value as possible. Because when we think about appreciation, let's go back to our property example, $250,000. If we see 10% appreciation over 5 years, let's use a rough number, that's a $25,000 increase in value on that particular property. Well, if we bought it all cash, we would see $25,000 increase on that one property. Now, if we took that same $250,000 and instead of purchasing that one property all cash, we purchased 5 of the same type of property, essentially, all at $250,000, and we put down $50,000 each. Well, now we're going to see, again, that same 10% appreciation, but across a $1.25 million asset value, that number now is what, $250,000? So the numbers get bigger with the higher value that you control. And so again, you just have to decide as an individual, are you okay with mortgage payments? Are you okay spreading your money out across multiple different assets and owning multiple different assets? Maybe you will only want to buy one property at a time because you're not sure about this whole real estate thing. Or maybe you want to spread your cash out as far as it could possibly go and leverage to the hilt, because you know that you don't need the cash flow today, and you know that portfolio is going to be worth more in 10, 5, 30 years from now, and that's all you're caring about. So it really all comes back to what are your individual goals as an owner, operator, as an investor. What is your time horizon, and what does your risk tolerance look like?
Very cool. That exhausts all my questions on the topic, Mike.
Sweet, man. Hopefully that answered your question in kind of a non-answer kind of way.
Yeah, it helps. I mean, it was informative, but it didn't answer the question.
That's me. I'm a slippery lizard, man. I should be a politician, dodging questions left and right. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone for listening in there with us. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you took away how to actually do the evaluation and determine what makes the most sense from a financial standpoint of buying all cash versus lending. And then you've got to layer on the emotional component for yourself as an individual investor. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a rating, comment, review, a question we can answer on another episode. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Happy investing.
Thanks, everyone.